And unfortunately, on corporate TV, you can't mention that even Ukrainians said there was a very real compromise reached between Ukraine and Russia 3 years ago in Istanbul, which was then sabotaged by the US and UK. You cannot talk about that yet on corporate TV. And maybe if we survive all this, we don't have a nuclear holocaust. Maybe one day, 50 years, Face the Nation will allow someone to say that.
It's almost like these people don't actually care about civilian life and Ukrainian lives. Almost.
They really don't. They really don't. And for one more example of this, let's go back to Fareed Zakaria on his show. When they have a panel of guests, they're always people who 100% agree. There's never a debate about, hey, is it wise? And are there alternatives to waging a proxy war against Russia and Ukraine? So let's turn to Financial Times editor Edward Luce, who has a new book about Brzezinski, the former national security advisor, who was really, a lot of this is his work. He dreamed about having a proxy war against first the Soviet Union and Afghanistan. That was actually his doing. And I'm sure he'd be thrilled to see us doing the same thing now in Ukraine.
It's a nice way to honor him.
Yes. And Corey Sheikh, who's with the American Enterprise Institute.
States. In your book, you talk about Brzezinski and Russia a lot. I had forgotten, and you wonderfully reminded me that his dissertation, written in the 1950s, predicted the fall of the Soviet Union because of the fact that it had trapped within it all these nationalities that would be struggling to break free, and that, the communism was not going to keep them together. It feels like...
Yeah, Brzezinski is also the genius who said that, yeah, sure, we funded and armed the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, but having some riled up Arabs was totally worth bringing about the fall of the Soviet Union.
Right.
Okay, and these riled up Arabs, quote unquote, the same people who ended up doing 9/11. So that's the strategic genius that Brzezinski was, who these people love to fawn over now.
Who, of course, is Mika's father from Morning Joe.
Mika from Morning Joe, that's her father.
Yeah.
Yes.
A strange way that we are watching that same dilemma of Putin trying to maintain a kind of the last multinational empire.
Yeah, I mean, of course, Brzezinski's Polish sensibility, given Poland's history with Russia, gave him, I think, that extra edge, and he spoke Russian. So that was all very, very helpful. But when Putin said the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical tragedy of the 20th century, he didn't mean, he wasn't lamenting the end of Marxist-Leninism or Bolshevism. He was lamenting the end of the Russian Empire, and he was expressly declaring, this is a quarter of a century ago, his intention of rebuilding the Russian Empire. Okay,
this line is always quoted from Putin, that the demise of the Soviet Union, that the demise of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. What they always omit is what he actually said. He said, that the main reason was because it left millions of ethnic Russians outside of Mother Russia, which then created a problem for Russia because they still have these cultural, familial ties to millions of people who are now outside of their control. And so when they have problems like they're being cracked down against, like in Ukraine, where literally after the 2014 Maidan coup, where the US helped empower radical ultra-nationalists, white supremacists, even some neo-Nazis, who tried to effectively ban the Russian language, that created a problem for Russia because Russia feels the need to protect them. That's what Putin was talking about. He wasn't mourning the loss of the Soviet Empire. At least, I mean, maybe in his mind he was, for all I know. I don't know what's in his head. But
that's not what he articulated.
In terms of what he said, he was saying it was a tragedy because now all these millions of ethnic Russians are now outside of Mother Russia. And what do we do about that? And yes, the U.S. has exploited that repeatedly, as they talk about in their own internal documents, that Ukraine's divisions are something we can exploit to help destabilize Russia. So that's the part that gets omitted here on corporate TV.
Right.
And that is what he's now doing. And one of the reasons that the subtitle uses this big biography uses the word profit is because he really did forecast this. And he did forecast that Putin and China would form a sort of alliance of the aggrieved. And I think we saw that last month in May on Red Square, Putin with, Xi Jinping, with North Korea. The alliance of the aggrieved was there with Putin. And they're backing this empire revanchism that Putin's consistent.
So the axis of evil, now we have the axis of the aggrieved.
Right.
And
revanchist.
Yes. And again, if Putin was revanchist, why did he support the Minsk Accords, which would have kept all of Ukraine intact, but just granted some limited autonomy to ethnic Russians in the East to let them do things like speak the Russian language without state persecution? That's the revanchist Putin that this guy wants us to believe exists. And it's true. Listen, in Russia now, there is a lot of jingoism, chauvinism, and some Soviet revanchism, but I don't think it would be nearly as strong had the U.S. simply let there be peace in Ukraine rather than use it for a proxy war against Russia.
Yeah.
Let's hear more of this clip.
He told us that he's all about.
And, it feels to me like, far from denigrating the Ukrainians, we should be thanking them, because they're the one people fighting and dying to stop this from happening.
For 5%.
Let's thank the Ukrainians for being our cannon fodder.
Yeah.
For being our cannon fodder. Yes. For
really appreciate it. For
boosting the profits also of our military industrial complex. Thank you, Ukrainians, for that as well. That's Fareed Zakaria. Okay. And this is Corey Shake of the Shaki of the American Enterprise Institute, a corporate funded think tank, and neocon think tank too.
Of the U.S. defense budget, Ukraine has fought the Russian military largely to a standstill and imposed 780,000 casualties on the Russian army. That is advantageous to the security of Europe.
She's so happy about all this death. It's so great.
It's so great that we've imposed 780,000 casualties. It's just so wonderful. Like, do you ever think, like, maybe not saying that stuff out loud, celebrating the deaths of 780,000 people? That's a lot of people, especially if their country has nuclear weapons.
Right. What a fucking sadist. I mean, but again, another reminder of why Joni Ernst's words are so resonant. We're all going to die.
They've imposed 780,000 casualties. So let's try to get that up to 1 million by spending another $200 billion on the military industrial complex. I'm sorry to make fun of her voice, but I mean, I think sometimes when someone is so sadistic, you can get a little personal.
Yeah, and she's also talking like she's giving like a some kind of public inspiration, public speaking class or something.
It's like her morning meditation routine. Like
exactly.
Visualize the 780,000 casualties of the Russian side and how inexpensive that was relative for just 2% of our military budgets.
Security of the United States. So I absolutely agree with you. We should not only be thanking the Ukrainians, we should be equipping them to succeed.
All right.
Man. Yeah. Oh okay. Well, yes. I again, putting aside the fact that you're celebrating the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, can you explain how killing a lot of people in a nuclear armed country improves the security of the United States? If anything, it makes this world a lot more dangerous because we're messing with a nuclear armed power that, can destroy the world many times over. This is how much these people love hegemony. Russia is a deterrent to U.S. hegemony, especially in its own region. Like the U.S. goal, the whole reason for the expansion of NATO, it was formalized in a 1994 Security Council memo under the Clinton administration. And they said, we're going to expand NATO for the neo-containment of Russia, because expanding NATO gives us a strategic hedge against Russia. They also said, we're not going to say that publicly. We're going to keep that in the background. And so Russia pushes back on that. And because Russia pushes back on that, we have to push back on them by fueling this proxy war that kills hundreds of thousands of people, which gets celebrated on CNN.
It is all so disgusting. The combination of what's happening there and Gaza, it's just repulsive.